Right, all right.
Okay. All right, welcome to the March 24th, 2025 meeting of the Envision Needham Center Project Working Group. As a reminder, this meeting is being broadcast to the town's YouTube channel and also via Zoom and is being recorded for publication, later viewing, and administrative purposes. I've not been notified that anyone else is recording the meeting, but if someone wishes to do so, please notify the chair. We do not have quorum, so this is an informational meeting at the moment, unless someone pops in. But we will take a roll call attendance for who's here. Kevin Keane,
Yeah.
Paul Good,
Here.
Paul O'Connor, here. Tim Bolger, the chair, is present, and Lise is online. Yes, give a thumbs up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kara Lustig is also here. Amy Felson, JP is online. And we have Margot Spiller, Cassandra Thompson online. Jim Fitzgerald is here in person. Karen Fitzgerald I have on, but she's not, I didn't see her there. Yeah. There's a few other members in there. That's from your group.
Yes.
Steve.
Yep, Steve Shikari, Emily, I'm gonna not pronounce your last name correctly. And then Sarah Johnson. I think that's, and then Mia Schultz.
Yeah. So we'll move on to the first item, which is the debrief from the webinar.
Okay. Anything you want to cover first? There you go. All right, so for those that weren't able to attend, we had a webinar through the Charles River Regional Chamber earlier this month, March 13th. And that it was well attended. We got really good feedback. I think overall it was a big success. So just to highlight what our event objectives were, since this was the first targeted outreach event to the business community, we shared a lot of the same content that was at the open house for the public, specifically kind of the overarching goals of the project, the upcoming milestones, talking through why we are doing a pilot, when we're expected to start that, and the process we're going through, both from a design perspective and an engagement perspective to come to a preferred design. We also had an informational or educational component that was highlighting best practices to achieve the project goals from a safety and mobility perspective, as well as that economic development perspective. And we had a few case studies specifically about how similar projects have had positive impacts to downtown areas. And I have those here since we haven't shared those before. And while it was a webinar, we did make it as interactive as possible. We had real-time polling and we had Q&A at the end where participants could unmute and ask any questions. So we got some good feedback from them. So in terms of who attended, we had 40 people register as of a few days before the event. There were 14 business owners that were registered, a representative from the public schools, the library, and the Y. So pretty good, collection of people. These are the two case studies that we presented. Tim, thank you for finding this West Roxbury one for us. This was a similar road diet in the area. I know people always prefer to have local examples versus examples elsewhere in the country, but very similar change in infrastructure. This project reduced the number of travel lanes and installed parking protected bike lanes. And in terms of the benefits, there are a lot of similar projects, but they don't always have a robust data collection process in place. But luckily this one did. You can see some of the stats. The travel speeds were reduced by about 6 miles per hour. Speeding decreased by more than 75%. Can't really beat that statistic. And importantly, these benefits were achieved with a minimal change in overall travel time and travel rerouting. So that's what we thought was particularly interesting given, I can share these slides too. Given the concern about the impact of the road diet on traffic circulation, in Needham. A little further out, this case study was from California, but it did have more of a placemaking vibe to it, or benefit. So this was, again, in a mixed use area, and they had a lot of those placemaking elements that we were looking to incorporate, including wider sidewalks, new street trees, better street lighting. And this study did track impacts to the businesses. So you can see revenue overall increased by over 100%, while also having those safety benefits, so reduced crashes for all modes. So in terms of, sorry.
Just a question.
Yeah, of course.
When you were talking about revenues increasing 100%, could you just explain more about
Yeah, I mean, I can,
what are they measuring?
I can't give a specific answer. We do have a link to the source, so I can get that specific information and share it after the meeting.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's great.
Margo,
Okay.
Sarah Jordan is asking to be promoted.
Yes, I think
I did.
that.
All right, let's see if we can get back to work.
Also recognize that Jackie DeWolf is president.
Hi, Jackie.
No, still don't have a quorum.
Still appreciate you being here. So we estimated about 40 people participated or joined into the webinar. And I will show the polling results after this, but main priorities, I was pleasantly surprised to see a lot of people are really excited about this project and see it as a great way to make the downtown or center more of a destination. They just want to make sure that between now and the end product, that the impacts on them are as minimal as possible. But folks were excited about more dining opportunities, improved safety, and opportunity for more green space. Looking through here, so these are the polls you can see for all of the polling questions. Not all of the people on the webinar responded to the poll, so I just know the number of responses. This was about the participants' connection to the center. This next one was a word cloud about what do you love most about Needham Center. So you can see, just give you a minute to look through these. Very restaurant heavy. Shopping, transit, the town common. So definitely finding ways that we can incorporate the town common more into the corridor. Open seating, etc. This I thought was interesting. One thing you would love to see come out of this project. So you can see slower vehicle speeds, pedestrian safety. While something we can't directly impact, a lot of people mentioned more vibrant or diverse, businesses within the corridor. And then here, we want to make sure that the pilot demonstration is viewed favorably by the businesses. So specifically, how can we make this experience as comfortable for them and as non-impactful as possible? So the overarching response was just constant communication, making sure people know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. So that's something we'll definitely have to coordinate with the town over the next few months and as a pilot and, construction when it does happen. Just looking through anything else.
Just a few I was there, there's
Yeah.
a few comments about like the
Yes.
MBTA, like integrating it somehow.
Yep.
Projects. I don't know if that was, I don't remember who said that, if it was from the business owner.
Yeah.
I'll let kind of get into it.
Yeah.
Saw that a couple times in the chat.
Yeah, another thing, if when there are impacts to parking, making sure that people know where to park, so having that real-time wayfinding component, definitely help.
So the option to turn off the meters during the pilot? JP, is that an option?
Say that again?
Suggestion here to turn off the parking meters during the pilot. Is that an option?
I mean, yeah, we'd have to go before the select board, but I mean, I don't see that being a problem, and it's gonna be a select board decision. It would be similar to what happens at Christmas, where a parking gets waived. We'll have to get the law statement from finance.
I don't want to mess with it too much though, because I'm worried we'll lose the picture.
Thanks.
Hold on one second.
That's not hard to turn it off during, it says maybe turn it off during pilot, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Probably would discuss that a little bit.
I think. I'll wait for this, I guess, but. If they have it,
Yeah.
back to that. Come on.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay, sorry about that.
Question is depending on how the infrastructure is set up, like barriers and things like that. Isn't it possible that getting to the meter would not be
Yes.
actually an option anyway?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
If you're narrowing the lanes
Yes.
in, then you don't have,
Right.
you can't get
Yes.
to it, so.
I mean, it wouldn't be too far.
No, but
During the
still.
pilot, it would just be.
No, but
you
you
would
have to be
get the
parking
sidewalk.
behind barriers, right, to be able
I don't know what we have for barriers yet. Nothing either.
Yeah,
besides-
I think once we have a layout to
Uh,
speak to, we'll figure out.
But yeah, at least, yeah, turn off the, like, why have meters? I mean, especially for the downtown, going through this, everyone's, a little confused by it.
I think if you appropriately price the parking. There's the park, we had the parking study, we just talked
Yeah.
about this. They kind of utilize some of the other parking lots that we have, encourage people not to park there, but making it free. Is going to create that demand for people that want to park there in front of the stores instead of park maybe somewhere else and walk through the area, which is what we would prefer, probably what would be best. If visitors.
I would just have a question on, we use numbered meters, we don't do zones, so how is the pilot gonna interact with the meters that are tied to the spaces?
Right.
Because we park based on spaces. There's space 25, 26, 27. So if the pilot doesn't allow someone to park in that specific place, we're either gonna have to renumber them where the people park, or
Yeah.
figure out another method of doing it where it's just, I don't know if we can go to zones. I think this is going to be a bigger question than, now that it's been brought up, I didn't really think about it, but it's a good one, Kevin.
But I mean, also, we had to mothball the parking for the duration of pilot, I think that. I see a point about trying to encourage it, but if the meters don't line up to spaces anymore, what do we do?
We'll have to rethink the parking strategy during the pilot and then talk about what that looks like for a final design as far as
Right.
what the goals are.
But to switch to zone parking right now in order to do the pilot, just like,
Seems like
this
a
is
lot.
too many balls in the air.
I completely agree. I think that, I think we're gonna need to have a conversation on it as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have a new parking methodology for meters going forward anyway, as I understand it, so.
I would generally agree with the induced demand theory, but we're reducing the number of the number of spots is a given amount, and it wouldn't be a situation fulfilled condition, so I don't know,
It's just great. Like,
yes.
Oh, sorry for coming in a minute late. So this was the business?
Yes.
On the business?
Yes,
So, how do we know how many businesses we actually reached in outreach versus? Okay, because it was like very small participation.
Yeah, so the chamber asked folks that wanted to attend to register for the event, and they sent the registration list beforehand, and there were at least 13 or 14 separate business owners that registered. But just, I think because of technical difficulties, not everyone that attended the webinar responded to the polls.
Yeah.
There were 40 people that called in, but only like 15 to 20 people responding. Yeah.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And then last but not least, we asked, what's the best way to provide information? So. All right, so just closing out the webinar discussion, I'd say I thought this was a great way to reach the community. So moving forward, kind of keeping this strategy as an ongoing, way to keep in touch, I think would be great if it can be accommodated by the chamber. In, coordination with other outreach like newsletters or, going door to door.
But the vibe was positive, or was it,
It was, yeah.
I was bracing that.
No, it was very positive. I think the only, people were concerned about the impact of specifically the full build construction on their business. So, understanding when that would take place, how, if it could be, construction could occur at night, whether we would have someone on site all the time, really like longer term, things to work out, but,
There was actually almost no negative feedback
Yeah.
on the actual design itself.
yeah, which was surprising.
There was a little bit in the comments in the chat, so I'm reading the chat there. But it was, no one was named in it. It was about like, bike lanes causing problems with their business somewhere else.
Yeah,
And so I don't know if that was a business owner here or who it was, but that was the comment I saw in the chat. The one that.
with that, I will turn it over to Jim for a traffic update.
Really?
Bringing the helicopter.
Yeah. Okay. So certainly the purpose of our efforts is to understand how the traffic patterns in the area will be altered with taking away travel lanes within the center of town with this road diet idea. And so our initial approach of kind of looking at the long-term range and what the future might look like with a road diet has changed a little bit based on our last conversation. We're instead focusing right now on what the traffic volumes and travel routes might be under the actual more near-term pilot program. And understanding what the needed mitigation could be with that kind of a scenario. We're also looking to identify the locations where we'll be collecting traffic data both before and during the pilot program along corridors and intersections surrounding the center and in the center to understand how things actually do change during the pilot with taking away some of these travel lanes and using that as a tool to kind of calibrate our long-term model and identify if there's any sort of long-term mitigation required at that point. So again, the notion of taking away travel lanes to return that space to the community will result in some changes to traffic flow in the area. And so what we're looking to do is to understand by taking away some of the capacity traveling through the center, what will that do for that cut through traffic that we know is cutting through between the highways and surrounding communities. So our analysis is based on a number of assumptions. First, that there is a road diet within the center. We're talking about reducing Great Plain Ave from 4 lanes to 2 lanes, 1 lane each direction, eliminating all turning lanes within the center along all the approaches, with the exception now of Chestnut Street, based on our earlier conversations and our earlier analyses on the impacts of Chestnut Street being a single lane approach, and the fact that the fire station is right along Chestnut. We're keeping Chestnut as a 2-lane approach the way it is today, an exclusive left turn lane and a through lane. We are assuming that the exclusive pedestrian phasing will remain in effect in the center. By this, I mean, when a pedestrian presses the push button, all traffic at the intersection stops, allowing for pedestrians to cross while motorists are totally halted. We are also anticipating there being some opportunities, based on the traffic signal timings during the pilot, to be able to somewhat monitor and control what the traffic diversion volumes might be. This could be done by altering the signal timing, green time, et cetera, between the different phases. And we are assuming that any portion of the traffic that is above the capacity of that approach will seek an alternate lane. There are lots of things that influence this, such as the amount of green time that you have during that's facing that approach, or the amount of friction that is expected to be encountered. And so what we're anticipating is, if we were to increase the travel time, the travel delay along some of those approaches, the cut-through traffic just looking to cut through from point A to point B, cut through the center, might seek an alternate route that might be a little bit quicker. And so that's what we're banking on and anticipating, just understanding what the volumes are. So we have a three-phase process. First, we are estimating how many trips we anticipate being diverted from Needham Center itself. Second, then looking at the alternative routes that those motorists might travel on to go around the center. And then last is to identify locations along those travel routes to collect some traffic data, again, before and during the pilot program. So starting with the first step of the process, looking at the center. This slide depicts the traffic volumes flowing along Great Plain Ave between Dedham Avenue and Chestnut Street. The light blue line depicts the eastbound travel flow. Dark line is the westbound travel flow. The vertical axis is in vehicles per hour. So you can see some peaks on this chart, and just to kind of highlight a couple areas. These orange boxes depict what is typically the typical morning and afternoon commuter peak hours. So in the morning, it's typically between 7 and 9 a.m. In the afternoon, typically around 4 to 6 p.m. And so you can see here in this instance, the morning peak hour, you can definitely see a peak falling within what is typical. And it's during these peak periods that we would anticipate there being some diverted traffic from the center, again, based on how much delay one might encounter and the ability to find alternate routes very readily surrounding Needham Center instead of cutting through Needham Center. So during these other periods when the traffic volumes are lower, we would anticipate that there would be less or no cut-through traffic seeking alternate routes, just because of the substantial difference, reduction in traffic flow traveling through. So again, we're talking about a reduction in approach lanes. So this is the existing lane configuration traveling through the center, every approach being 2 lanes. Different sorts of configurations, and we're talking about all approaches changing to a single lane approach, with the exception of Chestnut Street, which remains the existing 2-lane approach as it is today.
Would any of them have, I guess you couldn't do it this way, but any preference for turning movements as far as like staging them? So one lane would be going while the other 3 lanes are stopped, so that way people could more easier make a left-hand turn, for example?
as far as, you're talking about like a lead phase?
Yes,
where the-
yeah.
Yes, that could be incorporated to allow for a little bit better, easier movements for the lefts. Of course, with a single lane approach, chances are you might have some of those left turn maneuvers mixed in with the through movements, but yes, that could certainly be incorporated and could be helpful. Yeah, definitely.
And as part of that, you're saying then that um, are the turns with a single lane approach? Are the turns prohibited?
No.
Or they're just not
At-
going to have a turn lane?
So at this point in time, turns are not prohibited with the exception of the westbound Great Plain Ave approach, which is currently restricted. So we're looking to keep those turns as allowed. Now, of course, if we do restrict left turn maneuvers, that could change things certainly, right? That would improve operations with left turn maneuvers can be the biggest influence on delay. So that is something that could be considered. Of course, with that would be changes in circulation in the center. So motorists looking to say, go to a certain restaurant or shop in Great Plain would have to kind of
Further down.
work around
Yeah.
a little bit. So that could be something that we could look into.
And is the left turn on Chestnut Street that we're going to keep, is that from the police, like public safety, or like where did that, like leaving that there, where was that kind of
So-
protected from?
There's two parts to that. Number one is public safety, wanting to make sure that we're not impacting response time with the fire station being just to the south of this image, right? And making sure that they're able to access quickly. The other part of it is from our previous model, we found surprisingly that there was a decent amount of Chestnut Street was actually the greatest approach. The approach that will cause the greatest amount of diverted traffic. Based on our previous model. So it's kind of a two-part answer there. Okay.
You know, as I look at this, I'm thinking on Great Plain Ave turning left onto Chestnut Street is a dedicated left turn lane. And there's a one lane, that's gonna be a bear because you're gonna get some who will wait in traffic until not a single car is coming before they get into, I mean, that's gonna be a huge tie up.
Yeah.
And I think on Dedham Ave, it's different because the intersection is so large, it can absorb the cars in that light cycle.
Yeah.
But on Great Plain, turning on to left onto Chestnut, I think would be a bear.
Right.
And I also see it on Great Plain, turning left onto Highland. It's one, right now it's two, a straight and left and a right turn only, right? And that could bottle us up a lot. Can you work your magic?
Let's make it all go away.
Yes,
There
sir.
there would be some efficiencies gained, right, turning left against 2 lanes of traffic now versus turning left
Right.
against 1 lane of traffic
Yeah.
in the opposite direction. Right, especially if you come upon another car taking a left in the opposite direction, I assume yes, there may be some pains, but there also may be some efficiencies that are gained.
What about the idea if we do a little bit of it now, but, delayed green? So that this clears, then they get at least, 4 or 5 cars through the intersection, they're trying to turn left before the oncoming, which basically stops the lane.
Right.
And
I don't know, in terms, we were talking about this last time in terms of just context. I think, I don't know how much more you have to present, so stop me, but, beyond these, it is 2 lanes in every direction, so I would be curious to know, like, that might be helpful to contextualize some of this too, which is like, you only go like 1 more block and you're down to like 1 lane in every direction, and everyone's making those turning movements, right? You go 2 more blocks at Webster, and there's 1 lane in each direction.
Right.
Unless we all agree that that doesn't work and it's terrible and everyone wishes it was 2 or 3 lanes wide, I think some of that context would be helpful too, because otherwise it seems like such a big deal.
Right.
But it's what's really a big deal is that everything else is 1 lane until this moment.
Yep.
And Needham is like a functioning roadway network, yeah.
Right.
So that might be helpful for the storytelling aspect of this.
Sure.
both Mark Tree and Webster has a lot of left turns there. A lot of people turning left on Mark Tree.
Yeah,
Seem
even
to
just,
be able to.
yeah, even like going one more block in both directions, everyone is already navigating left, right.
Yep.
In,
Right.
out, four-way intersections.
And I think with the exception of one of them, none of these are dedicated turn movements
Correct.
either, so they don't
Yeah.
have the benefit of being dedicated. You're already having people going
Yeah.
straight and making a
And
turn
the-
in
yeah.
the same space, whether it's right or left.
And there's no driveway there. We're not like dumping, 1,000 cars on this one block, making these unique.
Right.
So it actually just gives parity to what everyone is used to. That's what I see when I look at this.
A lot of times when people are used to having the extra lanes, it's hard to fathom the notion of living without them, right? And so, right, and certainly the more travel lanes you have, the more efficient operations, but it's again, trying to return that space to the community instead of, that ideal traffic operations, well, what some might
Well,
call
depends-
ideal, depends on what you say
Depends on
ideal,
efficiency,
right?
too.
Yes, right.
Efficient means lots of
And-
different things.
And,
Yeah.
again, the traffic volumes do fluctuate over the day, right? And so it's not just about the peak hour, so.
There's less conflict too, right? Like would be safer. There's moving the lanes or going
Right.
down, somebody taking a left, so.
Correct. Yeah, and shorter pedestrian crossings and the whole gamut of benefits.
Do you feel confident with this?
Do I feel, I feel
Loaded
confident in
question.
it. I think the one thing that I'm pointing out here is that the with a road diet, as this is called, there will be an increase in delay and rebalancing of traffic on the network is really what it comes down to. So, the more lanes that are there, the less traffic is diverted. But then again, I think when you see the traffic diverted volumes later on, you'll see what that equates to, which is not bad. So,
Lise?
So my concern would be that the train red signal, when that goes, there's definitely going to be backup into intersections if you're waiting for someone to turn left at any of these spots, if now they're down to one lane. And then how will that impact when all the lights stop and you've got cars stuck in the middle of the intersection?
right, it will take longer for the vehicles to process through. But it is doable. I mean, even with the train crossing now, it's not all that efficient to begin with.
No.
So, having a single lane to process traffic versus multiple, yes, it will take a little bit longer, but. But it's not ridiculous, traffic will just queue a little bit further back than it does today because you have less stacking capacity too, right? So.
Right.
That's how it would operate.
I think also if you see how having a turn lane, the core block of the downtown would change what we can do. In terms of other elements, added bike lane, streetscape
Yeah.
width, it would make a huge impact on how that block looks. And is that worth it?
So in other words, yeah, and your queuing capacity is being dispersed almost instead of being in the heart of your center. It's being extended more linear back, you know what I mean?
Right,
So-
right. Absolutely.
Most of the intersections shut down now anyway. There's only very few that are allowed through when the train is preempted and the.
JP, did you want to say
JP,
something? Yeah.
I just question the removal of the left turn lanes, I say this as I know we're really getting into pedestrian things, but the fact that they show that like adding left turn lanes at intersections reduces accidents between 16 and 35%, and now we're taking them out on some of the legs, I feel like we're making it slightly safer for pedestrians, but we're making it considerably unsafe for the motorists out there. And there was just an accident out there the other day that luckily there were no pedestrians out there, because if had there been, was a pedestrian that was jaywalking and it had been pedestrians on the sidewalk, it was there. So I think we do need to balance this because I think that if traffic starts to get backed up too much, drivers get considerably more aggressive in trying to make turns or move through town and take other alternatives that may not lead to the outcomes that we want them to. And I think then it can become an enforcement issue as well.
Yeah, I think the intent is also that the changes and the setting here are substantial as well with the traffic calming elements, the streetscape, the pavement textures, everything working together to be a slower moving, less vehicle centric location that is very town center.
And, to put this in perspective, this is what we want to pilot. The whole point of the pilot is to see how it works.
Right,
So why, if we pilot turn lanes and it works then, we can't then in the design say, well, we're taking out all the turn lanes, hopefully it'll work. Like, it's in our best interest to pilot the Boulder option to see how,
Right,
people adjust.
and we do know that there is going to be substantial delay when this pilot begins, right? I mean, until the driver patterns rebalance themselves, there's going to be that period where especially on day one, right, that there will be decent delays. Of course, let's try to mitigate that as much as possible with, notices and out to the public, website updates, changeable message boards near the highway and all. But, there will be some rebalancing that will need
It'll
to
also
take
be
place.
July in this town of.
And that helps.
Yes.
That helps.
But I think also it's just the fact that in the previous information you talked about, it had been stated that that 80% of the traffic that comes in through Needham doesn't stop in Needham. It's just basically pass-through traffic that isn't actually benefiting the downtown at all. And that, I believe you said, was about 8 miles out is where the initiation of the traffic is. So that's a lot of distance for people to decide to take other routes if we make available what those other routes might be.
Exactly.
So, calming it in that way.
Yeah.
And also, when you have a physical space that is narrowed down and the perspective is it's a much slower area.
Right.
That just from psychological perception says, if I want to get through someplace quickly, this is not the place to go through.
Right. And not to steal your thunder later on, but looking at some of the alternatives, and how it narrows the roadway feels very different.
Yeah.
I was just also gonna say, two things. There was an accident there, but I believe the accident was caused by a pedestrian going out into the street. So, it was like a late at night type
Jaywalking.
situation. Yeah. But what I would say is right now, what I think is confusing about our downtown is none of those turn movements are exclusive.
Yeah.
So it's not like if you had like just a left lane throughput where it's a left exclusive turn, I could understand that providing more clarity than what we have now, because a lot of people are trying to go straight through our downtown who get stuck behind left-hand vehicles already because they don't realize that that's where that turn
Yeah.
movement is. So it's not, the current layout we have with no exclusive left-hand turns also, I think causes some backing up into the intersections because people are already, it's a current condition where they're waiting for people to take left-hand turns.
Plus people, if it did have a delayed green, then, with an arrow and so on, that people feel like they've accomplished something if they're one of the 5 that get through. But if there's one car that gets through and everybody sits there, that creates the angle.
Right. So it also, just to feedback, maybe a pedestrian caused the accident, but maybe the accident wouldn't have happened had the traffic been slower at the time, and maybe a different outcome would have happened had everything kind of been. Sure.
Too many lanes.
We do have a lot more traffic slides.
So, based on the assumptions that I had discussed earlier, we reanalyzed for the pilot program to understand what percentage of traffic and number of vehicles would be diverted from the center with the reduced number of travel lanes cutting through. And so if you recall, last time there was a substantial amount of traffic being diverted from Chestnut Street, which is no longer. Right now, the greatest percentage at least is during the evening peak hour. AM is orange, PM is green, so the largest percentage of traffic being diverted from any of these approaches would be 32% during the evening peak hour of Dedham Ave. And if we look to see what does that equate to in number of vehicles per hour, that equates to 32 vehicles per hour. You can see kind of a rebalancing based on between the percentages and the number of vehicles here. So if we look at number of vehicles that are being diverted, the most would be in the eastbound direction in the morning, 73 vehicles. Now, what does that equate to? Really, that would only equate to one vehicle every 50 seconds being diverted to alternate routes, of which there could be a number. So in the end, it's not a substantial amount of traffic that is being diverted from the center. And again, we're looking here at the morning and evening peak hours when we would anticipate things being the greatest, the worst case scenario. And so just kind of looking at what the biggest most diverted routes would be, it would be eastbound Great Plain Ave, combining with Highland Ave, heading down Dedham Ave, and more so in the morning, and then in the evening, the opposite, coming up Dedham Ave, turning left onto Great Plain Ave westbound or Highland Ave northbound.
Lisa, did you have a question?
I did. So I was telling my family last night that I had this meeting today, and I have, a couple young adults and my husband, and they just kept going, but I don't understand, where are all the cars going to go? And I was like, oh, we're going down to single lane. That's going to be a pilot. And they're like, but the car's coming from Wellesley. And I was like, well, they'll do Route 9. And I could not come up with a good answer as to where all the cars would go. And you're saying like only 70 cars and only one per 50 seconds. That seems like a lot of cars. And to be honest, I can't believe there's only almost 500 cars coming through at peak hour. So to me, this is like a lot of information that I have to try to, this is a little, like, where are those cars going to go? Is that the next slide?
That's actually a good
Yeah.
segue. I swear we didn't plan this.
And I need better answers because they're a tough crowd.
Okay, all right, here it comes. Emily, you're up.
Yeah, thanks for teeing that up. I'll just say first off, everyone, I'm Emily Cayley with Tool Design. I think Lucy Gibson maybe has been at these meetings in the past, but is on vacation this week. So I'm kind of subbing in to present this information to you. So she did a lot of this analysis, and I kind of supported her with some of that. So if you have any questions I can't answer, we'll definitely follow up and get back to you. But hopefully these slides are thorough and we can kind of talk through where are all those people going. So we just talked about the number of trips that would be diverted and now identify routes for these diverted trips from some of the data we have reviewed and put together. We've looked at the more regional trips over 32 miles in length. And we're assuming those trips are going to divert onto regional highways. You can see this map here taken from Google Maps. Why do people cut through Needham? These trips here from Northborough to kind of that red dot to the southeast, they're all about 30 miles in length, these trip lengths. You can see the trip through Needham Center is actually the shortest in length, but during the peak times, all three of these routes give similar travel times, a very wide range from 50 minutes up through an hour and a half. So we think that some people doing these longer routes, given how variable those times are, before they leave their house in the morning, they're going to check Google. They're going to look and see which route has a crash on it, which route has congestion for whatever reason, and really follow the Google Maps suggestion on which route they should take. And so if the route through Needham Center is even 5 minutes slower for that overall trip for them, they'll follow their computer, they'll follow their phone and take another route around there. So now the next slide, speaking to that a little bit, there's a lot of different behaviors that will impact the capacity and vice versa. So how the route change we just talked about, they might take whatever route their Google Maps is going to tell them to go. They could shift the time of their trip, shift the mode of their trip, change the length, put two trips together rather than taking multiple trips. But really for the basis of this analysis, we're assuming that people are going to change their route, that they're still taking that same end-to-end trip, but just change their route. But I think we just want to show this to acknowledge that there's a lot of different factors that impact how people travel and why they pick certain routes. And so some of the tools that we used in this analysis, first of which is Replica data platform. That is what we call like a big data source. It takes data derived from cell phones, traffic counts, demographic data, land use data, and then kind of determines the origins and destinations and trip length. And we use that to see really where people are coming from and where they're going to estimate what those diversion routes could be. Like we just saw on the slide, we use Google Maps. You know, a lot of people use Google Maps to plan their trips. And so we use that to help some of our analysis. And then we estimate the diversions that would occur. Again, there's a lot of different factors that may impact these. And this is really our best educated kind of analysis done during this, but really the goal of this is to identify locations for those traffic counts before, during the pilot, and can really see if we were on par with that analysis so that changes could be made before the full construction of this project. So then this here is a screenshot from that Replica data platform that I mentioned. And so with this, I know there's been some talk of all of the cut-through trips through Needham Center. And this data we used did really confirm that is the case. Here we have 28% of trips are longer than 32 miles that pass through Needham Center. Sorry, that was our second graph there. That 55% of trips are commute trips, are work trips during the AM peak again. And then 28% of trips are longer than 32 miles. And so again, looking, I think we'll still talk a little bit of the potential routes, but then just noting again that goal of determining the locations for traffic counts before and during the pilot. This graph here we really use to try to estimate what approaches those long trips are on at the intersection. And here I'll just point out, we're looking at the trends. Our navy blue numbers, that first bar in our sets are the trips over 32 miles. And then the orange and the light blue are the percent of trips essentially that need to divert on those approaches. And so from this, we see Highland Avenue is the only one that the percent that needs to divert is higher than the trips over 32 miles. So Highland, we're assuming, will have local trips that need to divert. All of the other approaches, all of the trips that need to divert can be from those trips over 32 miles in length. which can divert to those regional highways. And like I just mentioned, Highland Avenue is the approach that kind of has local trips that will need to divert. And here we're looking at sort of the potential routes for those right turns through and left turns on Highland. And then again, we'll know that those Highland routes are ones that likely that need to have local trips that divert. But again, since we are essentially, like I said, making a educated assumption of what routes are diverting, and we can collect counts on more than just those Highland routes, we want to identify sort of all of these potential local routes that might divert so we can collect that before and during data. And so we took a look at all of those approaches to the center, and we're thinking through those left through and right turn volumes and kind of have that mapped here for those more local trips, and really used these routes. We used Google Maps to inform some of this, again, putting our origin and destination kind of on the outskirts of that circle, and estimated where those trips would go. We looked at things like school locations. I think that was brought up at a previous meeting, that people may avoid driving by the schools. We do have Needham High School there and the hours of that school, so they overlap some with our diversion routes, but again, kind of just put all those pieces together for our assumptions to where people would route to.
Can you just add on to the map, the Newman School and the Sunita, I do the map in my head, is it, the Elliott School, yeah, the Sunita Williams School is outside of this. Just because those are on the sort of bookends of Central around that, and that's probably the hours of the Newman are different than all the other elementary schools. And that probably overlaps a little more with rush hour than some of the other schools.
Can you also just clarify when you say divert, what is the trigger again? Is it you don't wait one light cycle? Like what is the trigger?
So if we're looking at the center itself, what we're doing is we're looking at the what traffic exceeds the capacity of that approach. So when we're looking at our traffic signal analysis, it takes into consideration obviously the timing and all the friction along the roadway. So we look at the volume to capacity ratio.
Is it just one light cycle?
Yes, it would be one light. It would, yes, it was how much volume can be.
So you
going
could hypothetically run this again and just say, okay, people will wait 2 light cycles and then.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are an infinite number of
Okay,
scenarios.
yeah, in my own head as I'm
Yeah.
watching this,
Yeah.
when you say, you keep saying need to divert, but I'm
You choose to.
choose
Yeah.
Choose to divert.
if you don't make one light cycle.
Right.
Well, yeah, I think it's related to the delay, and it's that in theory, as long as that volume of vehicles wants to be getting through that light in that one light cycle, kind of if there's too many cars that want to get through, they're not going to be able to make it through. And yeah, at some point, the demand goes down after the peak, and people may have to wait longer. So it's not directly related to just how long people have to wait. But yeah, kind of as long as people are still, like you pointed out, it's not, you're right. It shouldn't say that they need to divert. It's kind of just how long people are willing to wait in those cycles.
And I think that one slide that I would just like to go back to real quickly, I'm sorry to do this, but this one I found to be the most interesting, or super interesting in that Highland Ave is the redirected traffic, potential redirected traffic or diverted traffic from Highland Ave would be the one to focus on because it's more local traffic, right? Versus the pretty high percentage of cut-through traffic that we're assuming is our cut-through traffic, given the over 32-mile span that these motorists are traveling. On Dedham Ave, for instance, and even Great Plain Ave eastbound, you know, are greater than the amount of traffic that we're anticipating could divert from those approaches. So that's kind of the good news, in that those alternate routes that they would likely travel on would not be in Needham. There would be those bigger kind of regional redirected traffic. So I found that really particularly interesting.
Yeah, so then we just have a few points from what kind of we just talked through on this summary slide. So reducing the vehicular capacity of Needham Center will likely cause trips to divert to alternate routes. But 10% or less of the total peak hour trips are expected to be diverted. Many trips are regional commuting trips that has been expressed. 60% are greater during the AM, are greater than 16 miles, 28% are greater than 32 miles, and 55% are work-related trips. And knowing that these are longer trips, the paths through the center, there are viable routes on regional highways, and very dependent on what's going on those regional highways. If there's a wreck, if there's a crash, if some other reason those highways get backed up a given day, can change what those travel patterns look like. And the degree drivers change their behavior will influence what roadways are impacted and by how much. And again, I think the purpose of this is to identify locations to monitor, and that can really inform the final mitigation efforts. This isn't an exact science, and yeah, I think is a really exciting opportunity to do this data collection before and after. And we'll continue to monitor that and recommend ways to mitigate the increase in traffic. And then this next slide just shows some of those, based on those routes, people could divert to the more local level, as well as some of the more regional routes. We're looking at things near some of the highway ramps as well, but some potential locations to collect that traffic data. And on here, the diamond shapes are more of the 24-hour up to a week's time of vehicle and speed counts. So that's going to give the total daily volume, hourly volume, but that's just sort of one location across the road. And then the circles are the intersection turning movement counts. So you can actually see the changes if people were going through and now they're turning right. We'll be able to identify the changes in those turning patterns from those locations.
I apparently hit a couple of buttons. Okay. So thanks, Emily.
Mhm.
So next steps are to further refine the traffic diversion model and confirm which locations of that last slide that we were just looking at, confirm the count locations on that slide. So that before the pilot takes place, that we can collect that traffic data both along the roadways and at the intersections and key locations to kind of monitor the impacts before and during the pilot, as well as having public informational sessions, public outreach, as I mentioned before, to alert motorists and even cut through motorists about the upcoming pilot, and consider the need for mitigation measures. We'd like to look at safety as well as operations. at those key locations. That we'd also continue to monitor during the pilot demonstration itself as far as the. Oh, the battery's yours. Sorry about that.
Charger? Yeah. I can- Thank you.
And continue to monitor the traffic volumes at those critical locations so that we can be proactive at needed mitigation.
One thing I did just wanna, at least to your point of thinking this is only gonna make things worse, it's important to note that as part of this, you know, making the signals talk to each other and increasing that coordination will increase, you know, throughput and efficiency. So there is a, you know, positive element of this and, you know, obviously a negative element with reducing some of the turn lanes, but just want to make sure that's kept in mind. And we'll get the
I thought one
charger.
of the most, I think one of the most interesting things I learned today was that you're right, the left-hand turns are not dedicated. So that kind of was an epiphany for me because I am stuck. I know enough to not get behind that left, but I can see where other people get stuck there. So I think that's an important thing when we have to talk. I'm constantly thinking about messaging and how I'm going to sell, you know, how to speak about this. So I think that's an important note and people can relate to that.
Oh, thank you.
I did have a couple of questions. With the diversions, there were 2 zeros on Great Plain Ave.
Yeah.
Heading that way, so that means that no traffic would be diverted. Correct. Okay. And so then when you're left with a road diet from there, it becomes very small, right? Like the amount of road that you're taking away is a few hundred feet. There's only capacity for a few cars, right? Now,
Yeah.
we're taking away,
Right, it's operating under capacity already, and so even by taking away the lane, it's still under. So that's why based on our model, we wouldn't anticipate diverted traffic splitting off because of higher delays and is desirable by those motorists.
and then on the last slide, those locations, those are for physical counters, not where you're gonna gather GPS data, right?
Those are just for counts, traffic count data. Know how many turns, how many throughs, how fast they're going, you know, depending on which set of data that we're looking to collect. And again, that's just our initial thoughts on locations to be confirmed or.
It will be like a physical, actual, accounting actual cars that come by.
Yes, with machinery there, traffic counts will take place there during periods of time, yeah.
Just having Cassandra pull up the slides. The charger isn't working.
Yeah, I just need permission to share.
Should be.
Does anyone else?
Try it now.
Questions?
There we go.
We've done something right.
Oh, no, we have.
Well, for that.
Yeah.
That's our traffic.
Yeah. There you go. No. I think you should be able to. Excellent.
All right. Is it working?
Yes, thank you.
Beautiful.
All right. All right, so we'll go through these next slides pretty quickly, but just wanted to give a design update. So just kind of summarizing all the feedback we've gotten on the sections presented to date and presenting some new sections and next steps in terms of what we would like to present publicly. So moving along. All right, so starting with kind of the easier block for Chapel to Highland, previously we had presented 2 alternatives. Alternative 1 had the raised bike lanes. So both alternatives have parking only on one side. But option 1 had raised bike lanes closer to the travel lanes and separated by the sidewalk via kind of this continuous amenity or planting strip. And then the bike lanes would be separated from the roadway by a 3-foot narrower buffer that would really exclusively be for streetlights or parking meters. But we do need that 3-foot minimum buffer between the bike lane and the parking, just for kind of design standards. Alternative 2, on the other hand, had the amenity zone right next to the roadway. So the streetlights, the trees, the parking meters, benches would all be co-located within that one zone. And then the bike lanes would be on the outside of that and separated by the sidewalks by only kind of a textured pattern with no physical objects in it. So feedback we got on these 2 alternatives, there was a pretty clear consensus for alternative 1. Folks thought people would be more comfortable having that physical separation between those biking and walking. I think it was Tyler that mentioned last time that having the street trees closer to the storefronts would, provide a better experience for patrons of the businesses. And then having that amenity zone closer to the storefronts would just be more useful for businesses in terms of, having benches there, or other things that could be used. Other feedback we got for this block was looking at, the original sections we proposed had a very wide sidewalk on the north side or the right side. And because that is already abutting the town common, really the need for a very wide sidewalk there might not be as great as shifting the right-of-way space to the south and having an even wider sidewalk on that south side. This section had held the location of the roadway center line, which is kind of why it was separated out that way. But we were looking at shifting the roadway center line to the north to be able to provide these extra amenities beyond the roadway while still widening that sidewalk. And then another comment from Tim was, at least for this core block, looking at having a wider bike lane just to provide that extra comfort. It would only be an extra 1 foot on one side, per side, which aligns more with kind of best practices at a national level. Next. The next section, oh, yeah, thank you. The one on the server doesn't have the, it's all right, just keep going. We will share after this meeting, some updated sections that incorporate the feedback, or Cassandra can pull it up. All right, so the next section we showed was Great Plain Ave to the east of the town common, from Highland to Pickering. So the 2 alternatives we showed, this one has parking on both sides of the street, with the exception of some isolated bump outs. Both of these sections do show the bike lane kind of separated from the sidewalk. So this one has narrower sidewalks. You can see there are 6 feet on either side. We still have that 5-foot amenity zone, bike lanes, and moving in from there. The second alternative shows a horizontal shift in the roadway, which would allow for parking on only one side of the street at a time. Doing this approach does allow for considerably wider sidewalks, so 9 to 10 feet. And really the rest of the section is the same as alternative 1. So the consensus for this section was not as clear. Some of the feedback we received, if you can keep going. Alternative 1, obviously a benefit to some is that there is more parking retained. And there was some feedback that even though it doesn't provide as much traffic calming as alternative 2, it's still a substantial amount of calming from the existing conditions, and maybe that's enough. For alternative 2, it definitely pushes the envelope a little bit more. It does have a more robust traffic calming effect, given that it not only narrows the roadway, but it also horizontally shifts the roadway, which is shown to reduce travel speeds. Other benefits include wider sidewalks, leave a more robust amenity zone. And then also has those more substantial bump outs on either side of the chicane.
Can I make a comment on this
Of
section?
course, yeah.
So, I hope it stays forever, but we have at least one staple restaurant in this area that is going to want outdoor dining as a component of it, so wider sidewalks would be a major component, I feel like, of vibrancy in that particular corridor.
Yep.
I think there's 3 restaurants in that area now, so it's not like it's just outfitted for one. But I know in our initial design, that was actually a key component, was providing on sidewalk dining. Right now, they do have a parklet. I imagine we would I would think a goal of this particular project would be to eliminate parklets and make them permanently affixed to the landscape.
Yeah.
I agree.
So that's just one thing I'll say, just for wider sidewalks, I think even we were looking at like 12 under the original design, so, whatever you can do to try to, I mean, even if it
It's
hits
technically-
the amenity strip.
Technically 15, because you have the amenity strip, so
Yeah.
like, for dining, it's 15 feet.
Right, so I
Yeah.
think like we'd have to
Yeah.
figure out how that could integrate into that amenity strip as well.
Yes, but alternative one, that would be tight.
Yeah, that's what I was
The
thinking, more on
amenity strip,
alternative one, that's
yes.
11, so that's just, yeah.
Walnut Street, which you had pictures in one of the slides, Walnut Street, that green apex or environmental
Mhm.
district, has this exact kind of setup where there's like the sidewalk and then the amenities zone like right next to it, so it's a really good example of that,
Okay.
using that space. It's Walnut Street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing, our sketches are showing that bump out areas being a good opportunity for kind of surface level green infrastructure. Elsewhere, a lot of the, besides at the intersections where we could have pocket rain gardens, the trees, much of the green infrastructure is subsurface. So this would be a nice way to kind of incorporate some greenery, but that space could be used for other purposes if that's preferred. So it's something we could talk through if that's the preferred alternative.
But also, what about crossing the street? I mean, obviously with it being even narrower and the bump outs and so on, that creates more opportunity for people to just walk across the street. And if there are only 2 lanes,
Yeah,
that you're also now in a situation where because people get out of their cars now and cut across
Yeah.
the street.
Especially the far end, yeah.
Yeah. So, and some people walk down to the crosswalk, which is in front of the Cause Exchange. But a lot of people, will just run across the street.
Yeah.
Number one benefit, of course, is that once it gets narrower, there's a lot less street to run across. So
Yeah.
that's helpful in
I would,
itself.
right. I would say all you hear from this section of the street is the parking, and especially with that UPS store with the trucks stopping, and I just think that's going to be not very welcomed by the people. Looking at this on the left side, those businesses, and on the right, you've got a pizza place that people come and go, and you've got the great place with the smoothies and the sandwiches. You got Sweet Basil that has a park. Would you make them not do their outdoor dining? I think they're applying for permanent. So I would think you'd have to go to retain as much parking as possible, especially in this stretch.
So what I'm kind of hearing is not the chicanes, but the wider sidewalks.
So I just wanna just add to that, cause I actually love the chicanes, but is more of a loading zone, cause we're talking about parking, but there's like a difference between pick up and drop off, 15 minutes run into the pizza shop
Yes,
versus,
yeah.
versus loading.
Yeah.
So I also wonder how, I mean, we can't do it all in a pilot, but there's a lot of creative things that people are doing around curb management that doesn't just say, that's not just universal, like either parking or not. So you could still have a chicane, but you could have a reserved loading for UPS, or how are you using, I don't know.
Yeah, so right now we don't have curb management, right? Like it's
Right, there's
parking
not.
or not, right?
Or
Like we
not.
did
Right,
during the
right.
pandemic and then that all went away.
I was gonna say, the one thing that happened previously when the UPS store was across the street and it's still there, but nobody can use it, is this temporary parking place to be able to drop off packages, and it's still sitting there. But there, it's not allowed to be used anymore, and yet it didn't get transferred over to the other side of the street where it actually is needed. And that's why you end up with all that, congestion on that side. So if it were.
Yeah, so I would just, look into like. Because especially during a pilot where you assume the businesses are gonna stay the same. And if you're gonna accommodate the existing restaurants, how can you accommodate existing other, specific nature of the businesses? That's not just a generic. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know in, is it Islington, they have done that with. Not that I'm suggesting this, but with, can't think of the word. Parking where you drop it off and somebody grabs it for you, like valet parking, there we go. Because of the same issue with like, they had some high volume restaurants that were there that were lovely, but they didn't have enough parking to accommodate that. Without using valet parking.
Or like if I don't know, but if the pizza shop is truly seeing that like every 5-minute turnover, I think Camella's is something I've witnessed it more. I'm just not familiar with that pizza shop. Then it's like, can you promote, hey, this is a
15-minute pickup.
15-minute pickup and drop off? Because then otherwise you're generically saying, oh, we have to keep all this parking for the chance that there might be pickup and drop off, or it could just be in a person who's parked there for 5 hours.
And I would imagine would curb management be a component of the pilot as well, where we could try to do a few areas with different types of parking as opposed to.
I mean, it sounds like the parking during the pilot's,
Tentative anyways, yeah.
Why not?
But I think even if you label a spot 15 minutes, you're gonna get a different person parking there than if you just leave it free.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
That's
the
what I was
post
trying to
office.
say.
A lot of,
Yeah.
Because the post office has 15.
a lot of the restaurants on the Sweet Basil side, they get their deliveries on Dedham Ave. So those trucks park in the straight lane in Dedham Ave when you approach the intersection, they're usually there in the morning at like 8:30 or so. So if we're doing a lane reduction in the pilot scenario, maybe there's space over there, to add some of that parking.
How's the access behind the buildings? When we did, we mentioned Walnut Street and Newton, that was kind of how we handled that and, off time loading, unloading.
Yeah, I mean, the loading works well now because the food truck is like on Dedham Ave and there's very little traffic. To me anyways, at Dedham Ave during peak hour, which is 8:30 in the morning. So they usually just park on the street and they get on the sidewalk and I think they hit up all the restaurants from there. They can go around the corner, Common Room and Sweet Basil. They're there pretty frequently. I don't believe that there's access to behind them there. I think they go on the sidewalk around the front, but there's a little alleyway where the Common Room has their parklet. But I don't think it goes straight through to behind the rest of the buildings there. I believe there's a fence there.
I think it's a really awkward.
Yeah, that whole building, they do have a parking lot behind there. There's an
Yeah.
entrance to it right next to, at the end of the block as you're going towards Webster Street. They do have a parking lot behind the building. It's hard to access, I mean, you couldn't put the truck in there. So there's also a public lot that's at the Christian Science Church. That is kind of behind these buildings as well, that is underutilized and because it's not signed and no one knows that you can actually publicly park there. And there's a sidewalk that's lighting up that night, so there are definitely alternatives outside of this area.
Well, that's a great thing too, where you can, if you know the loading times, if it's consistent, you can also say from 8:30 to 10:30, this is loading for the restaurants.
Yeah.
But the rest of the day, it's 3 car parking spots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a great use because no one else is featuring
Yeah.
businesses at 8:30 in the morning that aren't open.
This stretch is pretty
So I think,
quiet.
yeah, just being more creative with that is, it's pretty, there's a lot of variety of tools that I think we leverage. I guess.
Yeah.
Without saying, oh, it has to be chicane or not.
Yeah, understood.
My 2 cents about alternative too. Needham does rectilinear really well. In fact, Great Plain Ave has all the charms of a one-way at Logan Avenue sometimes. And it's actually kind of nice to see one, a little bend in the road. I think has, I mean, safety issue, but it's a little interest.
Yeah.
And the other thing, several times it is a season, and you're traveling westbound Great Plain Ave, the sun, there's this intense solar glare issue. And the idea that you could plant 2 trees on north and south side that somehow might actually save your retinas from being burned out is real, I mean, there's a benefit to that. And so I think a safety thing, but it's also sort of an artful solution. I'm sorry we lose the parking spaces.
Cassandra did pull up the updated section for Chestnut to Dedham. We'll go back to that.
Sarah had her hand up too a while ago, but.
I did, but I saw Lisa have her hand up and wanted to let her speak. I think just getting into kind of a little bit of the nuance around dining will be something that we can continue to refine, thinking about, is having space right up against the building really helpful in terms of dining conflicts potentially with pedestrians, or is it just, that's part of what makes it be a dynamic space that you're passing through the outdoor dining area, kind of where servers are coming and going. So considering the time, I don't know if we need to get into that, but something to just be thinking about.
Just so you're talking about with outdoor dining being on the sidewalk.
Yeah, well, so just where it is in relationship to the actual building face itself and between the curb, right? So I think there was the discussion about kind of like the parklets, not wanting that to be the default for it to actually be built into the infrastructure itself. And, you could imagine that within the sidewalk space, especially in an alternative 2, you could have dining that's in between the trees. And then you have a very wide sidewalk, or perhaps you have part of that dining kind of encroaches partway into that sidewalk. But I think just because you have outdoor dining already and kind of understanding, are there conflicts? Are you seeing anything in terms of people getting through those areas, or is it it's just no big deal? In some places it just varies, I think. Your outdoor dining is actually set up quite well compared to some really shoddily constructed outdoor dining, I'll say, during COVID, where there was a lot of conflicts and accessible issues. Just wanted to get your thoughts.
I think we haven't had the option of anything else, so that's why the setup is the way it is right now, as far as like actually, I'll take that back.
French Press is the place where we had the wide sidewalks.
Yeah,
But that was one of the few places.
yeah.
Had a restaurant and a wide sidewalk.
I think, and then they had it on both sides, right? They had it in the parklet and they had it in the adjacent to the building.
Eventually.
We did make the choice. I saw other communities that use their parking spots for pedestrian diverting and had it up against the building, and we chose not to do that. We chose to keep the pedestrian space the way it was and to redirect the businesses to the other side.
That's actually what I was referring to as not great choices made by some other communities.
I think maybe it's probably more of a conversation with like, I'm trying to think, I think the planning board should probably be part of that conversation as well. Just because they're the ones who did a lot of the zoning around the parklets, to find out why they made the choices that they did. I would imagine if we were talking more public safety people, they would like them to be more on the protected side, whatever that looks like, so further away from where the motor vehicles are. And then also, I think whatever we design needs to be dynamic, because we're building a downtown for the next 1,500 years. We'd love it if some of these institutions stayed there for that long, but there could be flexibility there, so making sure that whatever we build can be transitioned back and forth depending on who occupies that space. Because I've seen other designs where they have done it specific to a specific they've done it for a specific retailer, and then that retailer goes and it just doesn't make sense after that.
Do restaurants pay for the privilege of the park foot and the sidewalks?
They do, so they pay a fee, but I don't know what it is right now. They didn't for the first couple of years, because that was like a emergency measure to keep those businesses functioning. But once the COVID kind of restrictions went away for capacity, it became a permitting process where they basically rent that parking space.
Okay, asked.
Yeah,
And there's also.
and I imagine the same would be true for sidewalk space.
And there's also, beverage commission. Extensions that they have to get permission for to be able to serve
Yes.
out onto the south too. So,
We'll also get asked, I know who will ask. Nicola and I, everybody, but the loss of parking revenue during the pilot, someone will ask for the number, so. So get best guess.
Yeah, I mean. I would say it's negligible only because
I agree.
the cost
But
for
we'll get
collecting it is not that much more than what we collect. It's more of a turnover function than a revenue generating function,
I
but
just.
I completely agree with
I
you.
know where we're going, I know who they'll ask.
Yeah, yeah.
JP, so it's basically assume it's like Thanksgiving to New Year's.
I mean,
time.
that would be the time that you probably collect the most revenue and we're choosing not to collect, right? Cause that's when the businesses
want the free parking.
want the free parking. Yet the parking meters are supposed to increase turnover, which is supposed to benefit the businesses. So that's just the thought process. As we sort of go into it, but,
We would have the numbers.
well, we have revenue,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think I think that's actually in the vote from the select board. I think it says what the anticipated revenue
Yeah.
would be that they're foregoing for that period of time, so. We have that, and then we have the cost of what the collection, the counting, the depositing.
Sure.
All that is, and then, yeah,
I know mine.
yeah, no, it's fair. Yeah.
Cassandra, you wanna pull up that other section real quick? We're still just seeing the PowerPoint. I don't know if you shared a window and not a. Alright, sure.
There we go.
Nope.
Who's so?
You're on mute, Cassandra, also.
And it stopped sharing. Give me just 1 second.
So letting you share again.
Let's see, that's gonna be amazing.
All right, after much ado,
Did that work?
yes, thank you, Cassandra.
Okay.
So this is the same alternative, but shifted, to the north about 5 feet. Now the sidewalk on the south side or the left side is increased to 12 feet. And if you consider kind of the town common as an extension of the official sidewalk, that's still a very robust, pedestrian area. So that is what we will be looking at. Thank you, Cassandra. Back to our regularly scheduled programming.
And which, the other part is, which we observed in the downtown now, that we have trees on the side of the street where the sun is,
Yes.
and no trees on the one on the side
Yeah,
that doesn't have. Any.
yeah.
So, and maybe the consideration also is the fact that you bump out the side that tends to get the most amount of sun, because that's where people would most want to sit.
Yep.
And you can always, with the trees, it tends to cool it, but they always want to sit on the sunny side of the street and not in the dark, which tends to be colder.
Yeah.
So that might be a consideration for you choose.
All right, and then lastly, this is a new section for the western portion of the project limit, so from Nahoyda to Chapel, this is the existing conditions. Alternative 1, you can see this is a more constrained right of way, would have that 6-foot amenity zone, then the bike lane next to a minimal sidewalk, 5 feet. This would have parking retained on both sides. Alternative 2 reduces the parking to one side, and you can see with that change, we have wider sidewalks at 8 to 9 feet, and we are able to shift the bike lane to closer to the street, similar to the block to the east of here.
So was one of the considerations that. I mean, here it looks like, well, gee, we have, column A and column B, right?
Yeah.
But there are different considerations in terms of making all the bike lanes actually connect and intersect.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, they
With
can
both of
shift
them.
horizontally within the intersections to, have a path throughout, but yes, having it be a straight path would be preferable for sure. So. Keep going, Cassandra. All right,
Do you mind going back just quickly?
Yeah.
What was one, because what was one on this situation?
parking on 2 sides.
And is there a reason why it wouldn't mirror Pickering to Highland? Chicane, is it that just, it's not as much width?
Yeah,
I only say it because then on the other one, you show a little bit of parking on both sides and then
Yeah.
the loading, that gives you the option for the loading 15 minutes.
yeah, so this
Whereas-
has the rail crossing, which we thought the chicane would complicate.
Okay, yeah.
So we,
Signal would be.
yeah.
Yeah, just another consideration of if it's not all or nothing, like 2 or 1.
Yeah.
Is there a scenario where you would preserve some on, I don't know, just something to think, some on both sides, or again, the zoning or the
Symmetry.
15-minute or something, without it being symmetrical?
All,
Look into some
But
But I
hybrid.
see it's more difficult here.
all of the businesses on, I assume we're looking westbound here, right?
Yes,
They all have a parking lot behind their building. It's directly adjacent, and they all have, most of them have doors in the back of their
Yeah.
businesses as well. They all have their own. I think most are private, maybe, and
I was gonna ask, are they open to the public though? I feel like those are employee parking.
Some are.
Some
I
are-
think they're Dedham savings for some of it.
well, and Needham Florist parks back there.
Needham floors,
you know.
but you can park, I mean, there's
Yeah.
no.
You know, on that side, sorry, the opposite side, so like Michelson, that sort of thing. They have a little parking in the back, but it's not, I don't think that's open to the.
Oh,
public.
yeah. Mm-mm.
Yeah.
But everywhere else on the other side where there's no parking.
Yeah.
It's an alternative to, they all have parking lots that are.
They do, and there's
maybe-
public lots back there as well.
Correct.
so this, we can you go to the timeline? So, we're kind of working towards the next public open house. We do have that virtual engagement, which is more informational, about the feedback we've gotten to date and the traffic study, but just trying to look to next month, thinking through how many alternatives would we be comfortable presenting to the public. I always like to have at least 2, so it seems like people have a choice and can give pros and cons of each. So, our thought would be to present both options that we presented for each block and, present them as objectively as possible and let people, come to their own conclusions and give us that feedback so that we can move forward.
Is there a way to be able to take, without getting it overly complicated, but being part of the thing that I think is gonna be difficult for people to get perspective on is what the continuity is.
Yes, so, yes,
So,
to that
have a
end,
version that's linked together, so if you
Yes.
did this with the wide sidewalks.
Yep.
This is what it would look in this configuration, and then
yep, so for the open house, we are planning on having plan views of 2 holistic alternatives.
Right.
Yeah. So, to that end, we are proposing to shift the timing of that open house to after the school vacation week, so that we have at least one more working group meeting to talk through that holistic plan view, and make sure that we're aligned with what's being presented publicly. In terms of other timeline shifts, we are shifting the virtual engagement event 1 week out just to provide enough time to publicize the event. So that's April 3rd and 5th. We ended up on a Thursday evening webinar starting at 6 p.m. and then also a Saturday webinar starting at noon, so that just, we'll be able to get the most number of participants that we can. Also wanted to circle back on select board meeting options. I know Tyler tentatively said they have an early April meeting and then a meeting during spring break.
April 1st, and then, which is
April 1st.
which is a short meeting,
Okay,
and, the 15th is the next one, but that's.
But I think that's all when you're doing all the voting, right, on all of town meeting?
Yeah.
So probably not.
okay.
So is there
Maybe
one on
that's
the,
end of April too? Or-
is there one on the 22nd?
We haven't done the calendar, because we haven't reorganized.
I am out of town that week.
Okay. So then there's the,
It may be tough to fit this in before town
Yeah.
meeting.
29th.
And if that's okay on your end, that's fine with us. Just want to be cognizant of the fact that we haven't provided a select board update yet.
Kevin's been providing an update.
Yeah.
Okay.
Every meeting, but yeah, why don't we, I can come up with some ideas of when the meetings might be and we can try to fill that out, but it does get challenging.
Great. All right, I know we're short on time. I'll turn it over to Sarah. We have a couple slides on the pilot materials.
Absolutely. So we just want to walk through in, that towards the end of this, just kind of talk about materials, show images of what it could look like, and just big picture, go over some of our considerations. And if you have immediate strong reactions, kind of talk through those. If you have questions, we can talk through those as well. So next slide. So as we think about materials, you're just going to see a series of slides. Photos are on the right, and then descriptions with kind of key considerations on the left. So flex posts, I've heard some people refer to these as lightsabers, which is by far my favorite reference to flexible delineators. So these are great. You see them on highways, you see them in downtowns. They bounce back. They are lightweight. They're easy to mount into the asphalt. Jersey barriers, which you see down here on the bottom right, that is a really beautiful Jersey barrier. So those are those concrete barriers, and they are crash rated. So those are really helpful when you are creating, really shifting the curb and wanting to create space that is being occupied by people on the backside of it. Really want to call out that this material is one of the best canvases, literally, for incorporating public art. So one of the things that we have been talking about is, we could potentially work with the community to have people either come up with their own kind of art, or the design team could kind of do a paint by numbers, like stencil it out so that there's some guidance, and then have folks still be able to have the hands-on tactile experience of contributing, but with a bit more control over the aesthetic outcome. So with all of these materials, but especially the Jersey barriers, is just thinking, what use could they provide after the pilot is complete? Next slide, please. So planters, there are so many different types of planters out there. They are really not crash worthy. So that's not something that we would want to be using in places by themselves, unless it's like a very, very slow area. But for where we're talking about, it would mostly be between like the bike lane and pedestrian areas. Having self-watering planters is very helpful in terms of maintenance. These ones here, you can see they have a forklift, easy to kind of bring in and set down and then move again. Planters, those have probably the widest range of use after the pilot, but still something to think about. Modular seating, so by that we just mean movable seating, things that you can pick up and move. And so that would be for the expanded public spaces. We would need to consider how it is secured, if that's something that people feel like would be an issue. And then there are some places where businesses do have their own. They might actually enjoy being able to spread their own furniture out a little bit more to get a bit more space in between tables. So that's something that we would want to work with those business owners with. Next slide. Bike racks. So we heard that there's no bike parking. We saw that there is not a lot of bike parking in downtown. And so that's something that can be kind of fit into some of these spaces that are created. So we'd want to think about how the bike racks themselves are secured. Obviously, you don't want a really short rack that maybe only fits 4 bikes that someone could pick up the whole rack and all 4 bikes at one time. And then we have really fun kind of playful elements like sidewalk stickers. Those are great for keeping people informed or also providing wayfinding. So if we're talking about how do you find parking that's nearby, even that on the sidewalk kind of helps key people into like, oh, I didn't know that, that was around the corner. And then when they're driving, they're going to be able to kind of retain that in their memory better. And then other objects that are just fun and playful. So you can think about kind of impromptu seating provided by like the tree stumps that we have here. You could think about, big flagstones, how that creates almost like a hopscotch effect for people to meander and kind of just interact with downtown. So this is just a big overview of different types of materials. Next slide. And then those are all kind of vertical. Then we can be thinking about surface, paint and street murals, and how that can also come into to play in terms of livening up the space and actually making it legible what space is for vehicles and not for vehicles. So that's something that there's so many different types of paint out there for applying to asphalt. It's something, again, that can be more directed, but you can still usually have community members take part in. And those applications, we've done really large scale ones that for, like you can see here on the right side. You can see how that paint just goes all the way up the block. We do those for curb extensions sometimes to help make those be more legible. Sometimes it's for parking bump outs. You could almost imagine if it was in the sections that you just saw, we had places where there were bulb outs for parking. There's a chicane. We haven't determined the exact materials that we're going to be using, but all of these could be used in different configurations. So that chicane could be carved out by flex posts and paint artistic kind of street murals on the ground. The chicane could be roughed out by jersey barriers, on the leading edge, and then kind of on the back edge, it could be maybe something more decorative. So there are a lot of different materials here. I just want to kind of give you a visual menu of what we are looking at.
So anything I'll say is that I feel like a conversation shortly with public safety is probably a step that we could do in the interim, because in Needham, they have very strong feelings about pedestrian safety, which is great. I think you're going to need jersey barriers in any area where you are going to have a stationary pedestrian. So any place where there's a bench, any place where there's dining. I do also think we're gonna have to look at all of the existing parklet permits that we have and figure out where those parklets will go as part of the pilot. Because that really just didn't enter my mind until we started talking about it right now. They have, a few businesses have permits in place already for this year. I don't think it'll really interfere with it. In fact, it might actually give them a little bit more wiggle room because they won't be confined on either side by jersey barriers, but that will also be there. So we should talk to town hall about what parking permits.
It's only one.
Only one so far?
It'll only be one. That's the
Okay.
only Sweet Basil will be impacted by it. French Press is the only other one that has them on. Great Plain, Marcella Art, and all them are behind the restaurant. So it's just going to be Sweet Basil's.
Have them on the sidewalk?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen them there, but, so like, those will just be a few of the considerations, but if we're putting any like town-owned furniture there, we did do a little parklet a couple years ago, and we did put some furniture out there, and the only thing I'll say is if you can come up with a shade system that's better than what we had, because the umbrellas broke within like the first rainstorm that we had, so shade was always, when we did parklets or anything where we were really extending out, shade was a big component of it, just because it is, right now, it's not treed, right? We don't have those elements there, but like I said, jersey barriers would be there. The high school timing won't work out great, but I know the high school AP art, program, they did some of the pavement treatments up at the high school. So they've been talking about, everyone wanted to do like artistic crosswalks, and I keep on having to explain why we can't. So this kind of thing though would be, appealing, and I know that our, economic development worked with, some local artists, I think, or the, Arts Council for the Jersey barriers we have done. And I think we still have, I mean, we have a bunch still that are already painted that are just kind of sitting in the back lot because we don't have as many parklets anymore. So we have some inventory that's there already, that could be utilized.
Those are concrete barriers.
Yeah.
Do those have like a lifespan?
I think if they're not hit, they're fine.
Yeah.
So if we use them here, we can essentially keep them for other things later.
A lot of the, yeah, actually, a lot of the times, the ones that municipalities got in the beginning of that were ones that the, highway was done, like, the MassDOT was done with, and couldn't redeploy, and so they got deployed for our purposes, because they're not dealing with like 60-mile-per-hour vehicles, they're dealing with 30, but, we had to do a full enclosure around all the parklets to satisfy, our public safety people.
Mhm.
Okay. Cassandra, next slide. Okay. All right, so in closing. What? All right, so we will share updated slides with the latest typical sections as soon as we have a plan view that pulls it all together. We will be sharing it with you. Just want to make sure it's well thought out and ready for your eyes. Please email any feedback, additional feedback you have. It's been incredibly helpful. In terms of other things you can do to help, spread the word about the upcoming virtual events, again, April 3rd, April 5th. And starting to have those lines of communication with folks that would be interested in helping out with the art element of the pilot. Would love to start that sooner than later. So if you have any ideas of people that would be interested, we can just start a kind of contact list.
I just also add on the planter side, so I love the idea of more greenery in the downtown, and that's kind of one of the things we've been talking about. We don't have a plan or a program from a town perspective as far as maintenance goes.
Yeah.
It used to be, there was a local landscaper who did a lot of that for us. He has since retired, literally sailing around the world. But I do believe that the Needham Garden Center has kind of taken on that role in a lot of ways, so it's possible to reach out to them to see if they might, like, especially if it's just for a pilot, it's not for a long term.
Yeah.
They might be interested in sponsoring some of that, because I think even if you do, like, let's say you even, which is probably not a good idea, but let's say you Jersey barrier like a half of this up or all of it, I think having some greenery in it will fill those vacant spaces, because they're not really gonna be occupied like that. New
Yes.
middle
No
zone is really not gonna be
manifest, yeah.
occupied by anything, so it's gonna look a little,
Barren.
post-apocalyptic, yeah.
There's an all or none, right? Like we could put planters near the garden center or near the florist.
Yep,
Places that may wanna.
provide some upkeep as well, yeah.
And one of the things I think that, although it's probably not within the scope of this, but one of the things that the town obviously is gonna have to address is that whatever the projection is as to what we would have in the future is the acquisition of a water truck and any of the other things that are necessary to be able to maintain it. I know Carmel, Indiana does an amazing job of all the planters and so on, but I've talked to the guys who actually go out and water them, and they have literally a group of people who their whole thing is just maintaining all the.
Yeah.
So it's, it's one of the things where we haven't really moved into that stage. But it's a budgetary thing that needs to be.
Yeah, and I think,
Scope of it.
yeah, agreed. I actually think it's probably gonna be more the green infrastructure that's gonna require more maintenance, and I think that's actually more on the drainage side than on the, when we get to a final product, which we have to do, I mean, for a bunch of, physical reasons from stormwater management and compliance reasons from, stormwater, quality management. We kind of have to do these things anyways, but it will be, a pretty large component, but figuring out probably an interim ownership of it would be helpful, because basically my park staff is staffed to mow. That's really what we're staffed for, mow and plant trees.
Right.
We don't really have a big, aesthetic improvement, flower. And that was actually one of the comments we got about the common was that it's not like a public garden, and we said, yeah, we don't have, that's not what we're structured for, we're structured for grass and trees and that sort of amenity, but maintaining seasonal gardens that we replant and change out and that kind of stuff, not so much. And I would hope with the permanent components, we'd be dealing with much more resilient plantings that won't
Yeah.
require as much maintenance, compared to a pilot, which you're gonna have annuals and you're gonna need a lot more maintenance on those.
Yeah, that's spot on. I mean, when you have space for trees with enough rootable soil volume for them, and especially if we're able to direct, what water there is to them, they're going to do well, and they just take less maintenance than perennials and annuals, and and then exceedingly less compared to what you're dealing with in a confined planter that's above ground and exposed to the heat.
One thing you don't have, and I don't know if like it's liked or not liked, but I know like Norwood does turf for their area that's like a parklet. They take a street and they put down
Oh, yeah, that's right.
turf
Yeah.
in an area. That might be a nice way to either replicate like a strip
Yeah.
or like another area that shows that it can be both for pedestrians and for like street furniture as a treatment as opposed to just the paint as an option.
Yeah,
So
that's a great idea.
One of the other things I'll just mention, as far as the aesthetic feel is, if we, now that we have built speakers into the town common, one of the things that we haven't done is allow it to be wirelessly controlled. And being able to have, if there's any money to do that, to be able to get that sort of, we could have the programming happening in town hall. They could set up whatever type of music it could be and so on. And that it could just be broadcasting to those speakers, because Norwood does a fantastic job of that. And I spoke to the gentleman who actually oversees that and went through all the iterations of trying different music and so on. In their particular situation, they said basically mellow jazz was sort of the thing that nobody seemed to complain about and any other of the genres that they had trouble with. But it was just, sort of background, pleasant, upbeat kind of thing. But it really changes the atmosphere. When people are just, come down there in the evening and the music is playing and, it creates a whole experience. And I think with some of these changes, the more of those additional aesthetics that they can bring in, would be great if that's possible to get that equipment.
Can I just, one more question about the outreach. This is my own, just feeling of a great responsibility to help with the outreach as a member of this committee, because I don't feel like just my participation reflects public engagement, right? It's more like advisory as individuals. Last time when there was events, we didn't get independent communication as a group. I just got the formal communication as just a person who's on the Needham newsletter. But can I just make a request that once you have materials for these two events, that you just send us a formal email that says, here's the description.
Yeah,
even if it's
please
copied and
circulate it.
pasted
Yeah,
from
yeah,
the newsletter,
yeah.
and just ask us to like circulate it.
Yeah.
And the second thing is if you have like a distribution list, if you can share that and where we might, then we can think about where we can add, because my head goes to everything, like businesses, schools, this, Cub Scouts, whatever, but I know you guys are always like, yep, we have that list, yep, we send it to them, yep. So it might just be nice if you can share what your baseline list is, and then we can help fill in the gaps to say, oh, wait, we can also get it out through the street back group or whatever, and just add to it.
Yeah.
But I know that's not necessarily our responsibility, but it's just a personal thing where people are like, oh, I see you're on this, committee. Yeah, it's like, what does that actually mean?
Yeah. I know, Amy, not to put you on the spot, but I know we had an old email sign up list. Are we using that, or is it mainly through official like town?
Yes, so we will be using that. There is, as you referenced, there was this notifying me list that people signed up for phase one of the project many years ago.
Yep.
We're gonna resurrect that. It's actually active, so when people go to the town's website now,
They'll sign up, yeah.
needham.gov/Envision Meeting Center, they'll see that there actually is a link to sign up. It'll bring you to that notify me page where people can sign up. So included in my list of outreach for these events coming up in early April are to utilize all the town communication channels to make sure that we cover it covered. And I do have an extensive list, which I'm happy to share, as far as, sharing with community groups and PTCs and faith-based organizations. It's pretty comprehensive that we've used for a lot of different initiatives, but happy to share it because you may say, well, I know, the Boy Scout troop parents, and I can share it with them. But those are lists that I'm not gonna have, so that would be great. Thanks.
Right at 7.
Or at 7, just, one comment before we started a little after 7, so. When we're presenting to the community, I find that the images on like street level of the cross sections to be much more impactful than like looking from above, because it's kind of, you're looking at like parking and cars, but when you're, I think Sarah we showed a slide maybe at the end of the meeting, but like you're down on the same level. And the human scale of like what it would feel like to be on the street is much more impactful than like looking above.
Yeah.
Just as we move forward.
Yeah, no, appreciate it.
Any other comments? We don't need the motion because it's an information meeting, so the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.